The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Portland, Oregon, as Vivienne Vaughan ran breathless toward the church. Her white wedding gown mudded at the hem from her desperate flight through town. Tears streamed down her face, not of joy but of desperation, for in less than an hour she would be forced to say, "I do," to Silas Blackburn, the wealthiest and most brutal rancher in the territory. The year was 1875, and for a woman with no family and crushing debt, choices were as scarce as rain in August. "Miss Vaughan." A deep voice called from behind her. Vivienne whirled around, ready to flee again if it was one of Blackburn's men sent to drag her back. Instead, she found herself staring into the stormy gray eyes of Wade Quincy, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who had arrived in Portland 3 months prior. His weathered Stetson was pulled low over his brow, and his expression was one of genuine concern rather than the predatory look she had grown accustomed to seeing in men's eyes. "Mr. Quincy," she breathed, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks. I needed some fresh air before the ceremony." Wade's gaze traveled over her disheveled appearance, noting the mud on her dress and the wild look in her eyes. "Seems to me like you're running from something, not preparing for it," he said quietly. Vivienne looked away, unable to deny his observation. "It does not matter. I have no choice." Wade stepped closer, his spurs jingling softly against the boardwalk. "Everyone has a choice, Miss Vaughan, even when it doesn't feel like it." "Not when you owe a man like Silas Blackburn everything you have and more," she whispered, the shame of her circumstances burning in her chest. "My father's debts, the mortgage on the millinery shop. I have nothing left to bargain with except myself." Wade's jaw tightened at the mention of Blackburn's name. He had encountered the rancher several times since arriving in town, each meeting leaving him with a stronger distaste for the man who ruled the county with money and fear. "There's always another way," he said firmly. "The wedding is in 1 hour," Vivienne replied, her voice hollow. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Quincy, I must return before I'm missed." As she turned to go, Wade reached out, his calloused fingers gently catching her wrist. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "What if I told you there was a way out?" Vivienne's heart stuttered in her chest. "Please don't offer false hope. It's crueler than no hope at all." "I never make promises I can't keep," Wade said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Give me an hour, Miss Vaughan, that's all I ask." She hesitated, torn between the practical reality that had led her to accept Blackburn's proposal and the desperate wish to escape it. 1 hour, she finally agreed, knowing that in 60 minutes her fate would be sealed one way or another. Wade nodded once, released her wrist, and strode purposefully down the street toward the bank. Vivienne watched him go, then slowly made her way back to the small room behind the church where she was meant to prepare for her wedding. Martha, the dressmaker who had volunteered to help her dress, looked up with relief when Vivienne entered. "There you are, child. I was worried sick. The ceremony starts soon, and Mr. Blackburn is already here with half the county." "I'm sorry," Vivienne murmured, allowing the older woman to fuss with her veil. "I needed a moment to collect myself." "Cold feet are natural," Martha said kindly, though her eyes betrayed her concern. Everyone in town knew what kind of man Silas Blackburn was. At 45, he was more than 20 years Vivienne's senior, and his first 2 wives had both died under circumstances that invited whispers. His sprawling cattle ranch, Raven's Peak, was the largest in the county, and his influence extended from the mayor's office to the sheriff's department. As Martha arranged Vivienne's auburn curls beneath the veil, the church bells began to ring, signaling the approaching ceremony. Vivienne's heart sank. The hour had passed, and Wade Quincy had not returned. "It's time, dear," Martha said gently, helping Vivienne to her feet. With leaden steps, Vivienne made her way to the church doors. The organist began playing the wedding march, and the small crowd inside rose to their feet, turning to watch her entrance. At the altar stood Silas Blackburn, his dark suit immaculate, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed. His smile did not reach his cold eyes as they raked over her figure. Vivienne forced herself to put one foot in front of the other. With no father to walk her down the aisle, she made the journey alone, feeling every eye upon her. Some gazes held pity, others curiosity, but none offered help. When she reached the altar, Silas took her hand in his, squeezing it with unnecessary force. "You look beautiful, my dear," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "Though I would have preferred you hadn't mudded the dress I paid for." The minister cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The church doors crashed open, silencing the minister and causing everyone to turn in surprise. Wade Quincy stood in the doorway, his clothing dusty from riding, determination etched into every line of his face. "I object to this union," he called out, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent church. Silas Blackburn's face darkened with fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, stepping forward as if to personally throw Wade out. Wade strode down the aisle, his spurs jingling with each step. "This wedding cannot proceed," he stated firmly, looking directly at Vivienne. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. "On what grounds?" the minister asked, clearly flustered by the interruption. Wade reached into his coat pocket and pulled out several folded papers. "On the grounds that Mr. Blackburn's claim on Miss Vaughan is fraudulent." He unfolded the papers and handed them to the minister. "These are receipts showing that all debts owed by the late Mr. Vaughan to Silas Blackburn have been paid in full as of 30 minutes ago." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Silas snatched the papers from the minister's hands, his face contorting as he read them. "This is impossible," he snarled. "You couldn't have the money, but I did," Wade interrupted calmly. The Bank of Portland was happy to accept payment and provide a full release of all liens and claims. Vivienne stared at Wade in disbelief. "Mr. Quincy, how?" Before he could answer, Silas lunged forward, grabbing Vivienne's arm. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "We had an agreement." "Your hand for your father's debts." "An agreement made under duress," Wade countered, stepping closer. "And now rendered null by the satisfaction of those debts." The sheriff, who had been sitting in the front pew, rose to his feet. "Blackburn, you'd best let go of the lady," he said, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. For a moment, it seemed Silas might refuse. Then, with a snarl of rage, he released Vivienne's arm, leaving red marks where his fingers had dug into her skin. "This isn't over," he warned, glaring at both Vivienne and Wade before storming down the aisle and out of the church. A stunned silence fell over the congregation. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly. "I suppose, given the circumstances, the ceremony is canceled." Vivienne stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Wade turned to her, his expression softening. "Miss Vaughan," he said quietly, "may I speak with you outside?" Still dazed, she nodded and allowed him to lead her out of the church and into the autumn sunshine. Once they were alone on the steps, she found her voice. "Mr. Quincy, I don't understand. How did you pay my father's debts? It was over $5,000. Wade removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I've been saving for years to buy my own ranch," he explained. "Had nearly enough set aside. When I saw you running from that church, looking like you were headed to your execution rather than your wedding, well, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch." Tears welled in Vivienne's eyes. "You gave up your dream for a woman you barely know." "Dreams can change," he said simply. "And I know enough about you to know you deserve better than being sold to a man like Blackburn." "I can never repay you," she whispered, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I'm not asking for repayment," Wade replied, "but I do have a proposition for you." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "Blackburn won't take this humiliation lightly. He'll find another way to come after you as long as you're here in Portland." "What are you suggesting?" Vivienne asked, a flutter of apprehension mixing with something else, something that felt strangely like hope. Wade met her gaze directly. "I'm heading to Colorado Territory. I've heard there's good land there, affordable enough that I might still be able to start a small ranch with what I have left. It's a fresh start far from Blackburn's reach." He hesitated, then extended his hand to her. "You could come with me, as my wife." Vivienne's breath caught in her throat. "Your wife," she repeated, certain she had misheard. "It would be a marriage of convenience," Wade clarified quickly. "I need a partner, someone strong and capable, which I believe you are. You need protection and a new beginning. We could help each other." "You're proposing marriage to a woman you met 3 months ago and have spoken to perhaps a dozen times?" Vivienne asked incredulously. A small smile lifted the corner of Wade's mouth. "I'm a man who knows quality when I see it, Miss Vaughan, but I understand if you need time to consider. It's not a small thing I'm asking." Vivienne looked back at the church, then down at the muddy hem of the wedding dress she had dreaded wearing. In the space of an hour, her entire future had been rewritten. "When would we leave?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "First light tomorrow," Wade replied. "The longer we stay, the more danger we're in from Blackburn." Vivienne took a deep breath, considering the enormity of what she was contemplating. To leave everything she knew, to travel to an untamed territory with a man she barely knew. And yet, the alternative was to stay and face Blackburn's inevitable retribution. "I'll need to pack my things," she said finally. "And I should at least try to sell the millinery shop to recoup some of what you spent." Wade's expression brightened with hope. "Is that a yes, Miss Vaughan?" Vivienne hesitated for only a moment longer before extending her hand to meet his. "I believe it is, Mr. Quincy, though if we're to be married, perhaps you should call me Vivienne." Wade's strong fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "Vivienne," he repeated, the name sounding like a promise on his lips. "And I'm Wade." Their eyes met, and in that moment, standing outside the church where she had nearly been forced into one marriage and had unexpectedly agreed to another, Vivienne felt something she had not experienced in years: hope. "We should go," Wade said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Blackburn will be gathering his men. We need to make preparations." Vivienne nodded, gathering her skirts. "I'll change and pack what I can." "Where shall I meet you?" "The livery stable at dawn," Wade replied. "I'll arrange for transportation and supplies." He glanced at the church, where people were beginning to filter out, curious expressions on their faces. "Can you manage until then?" "I've managed worse," Vivienne assured him with a determined lift of her chin. "I'll be there." As they parted ways, Vivienne felt the weight of countless stares following her through town. By nightfall, every soul in Portland would know what had happened at the church. By dawn, she would be gone, headed for a future she could never have imagined that morning. In her small room above the millinery shop, Vivienne changed out of the wedding dress with shaking hands. She packed her most practical clothing, a few treasured mementos of her parents, and the tools of her trade as a milliner. Everything else she would leave behind. As darkness fell, she heard a commotion in the street below. Peering cautiously through her curtains, she saw Silas Blackburn and several of his men outside the saloon across the street. Blackburn was shouting, his face flushed with drink and rage. "Quincy is a dead man," he bellowed. And that ungrateful woman will learn what happens when someone crosses Silas Blackburn. Fear clutched at Vivienne's heart. She hoped Wade was somewhere safe, out of Blackburn's reach until morning. She barricaded her door with a chair and lay down fully clothed, her small travel bag packed and ready beside her. Sleep eluded her as she listened for any sound that might indicate Blackburn had discovered her whereabouts. The night passed slowly, each creak and distant shout causing her heart to race. Finally, as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, Vivienne slipped out of her room and made her way cautiously toward the livery stable. The streets were quiet, most of the town still sleeping off the previous night's excitement. When she reached the stable, she found Wade already there, loading supplies onto a wagon. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him unharmed. "You made it," he said, a similar relief evident in his voice. "Were you worried I might change my mind?" she asked. "I was worried Blackburn might have found you," Wade admitted, helping her into the wagon. "He and his men tore up the saloon last night looking for me. Fortunately, I was camped outside town." "He was outside my shop too," Vivienne said. "I heard him threatening you." Wade's expression hardened. "All the more reason to put distance between us and Portland as quickly as possible." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Are you ready?" Vivienne cast one last look at the town that had been her home all her life. The millinery shop her mother had started and she had inherited. The church where both her parents had been buried. The memories, good and bad, that she was leaving behind. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." Wade flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward. As they passed the town limits, Vivienne felt both regret and relief mingling in her chest. Behind them lay everything familiar. Ahead, an uncertain future with a near stranger who had sacrificed his dream to save her from a nightmare. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Wade's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, but his hand briefly covered hers where it rested on the seat between them. "We're in this together now," he replied. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The wagon rolled onward as the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that stretched before them. Vivienne didn't know what awaited them in Colorado territory, but for the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than running from it. And that, she decided, was enough for now. The journey to Colorado territory was arduous. After leaving Portland, Wade and Vivienne traveled south and east, following established trails when possible and camping under the stars when no towns were nearby. They spoke little during the first days, both adjusting to their new circumstances and the constant presence of each other. On their fourth night on the trail, as they sat beside a small fire while their dinner of beans and salt pork simmered in a cast iron pot, Wade finally broke the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I realized I never asked about your skills," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Besides being a milliner." Vivienne looked up from the shirt she was mending one of Wade's that had torn during their hasty departure. "What sort of skills do you mean?" "Ranching skills," Wade clarified. "Can you cook, garden, tend animals? I've been so focused on getting us away from Blackburn that I never considered what you know about the life we're headed into." A smile tugged at Vivienne's lips. "You mean beyond making fashionable hats for ladies who never have to lift a finger?" Wade had the grace to look chagrined. "I didn't mean to imply I know," Vivienne interrupted gently. "And to answer your question, I was raised in town, but my mother taught me to cook, preserve foods, and keep a garden. My father insisted I learn to shoot a rifle and ride a horse, though I haven't done much of either in recent years. After they died, I ran the millinery shop and kept the books myself. I'm a quick study, Mr. Quincy Wade," she corrected herself. "I won't be a burden to you." Wade's expression softened. "I never thought you would be. I was just wondering what parts of ranch life might suit you best." "And what parts might that be?" Vivienne asked, genuinely curious. "Well," Wade said thoughtfully, "a successful ranch needs more than just someone who can rope cattle. It needs gardens for food, careful accounting of expenses and profits, a well-run household. All the things that turn a piece of land into a home." The word home hung between them, weighted with meaning. Neither had truly had a home in years, Wade drifting from ranch to ranch as a hired hand, saving his money. Vivienne existing in the rooms above her shop, working endless hours to keep ahead of the debts that eventually overwhelmed her. "I'd like that," Vivienne said softly. "To help build a home." Wade's gaze met hers across the fire, something unspoken passing between them. "Then we'll build it together," he promised. The next day brought them to a small settlement where they could resupply. As Wade haggled with the general store owner over the price of flour and coffee, Vivienne noticed a crudely printed poster tacked to the wall. Her blood ran cold as she read. "Wanted for theft and abduction, Wade Quincy, $500, reward contact Silas Blackburn, Portland, Oregon." Beneath the text was a rough sketch that bore a passing resemblance to Wade. "We need to leave," she whispered urgently when Wade returned to her side. She nodded discreetly toward the poster. Wade's jaw tightened as he read it. "Blackburn works fast," he muttered. "Let's go." They departed the settlement immediately, pushing their horses harder than before. That night they made camp in a secluded grove well off the main trail. "Will this follow us all the way to Colorado?" Vivienne asked as they ate a cold supper, having deemed a fire too risky. "Blackburn's influence only stretches so far," Wade replied, though uncertainty edged his voice. "Once we cross into Colorado territory, we should be safer. But we'll need to be cautious until then." "I'm sorry," Vivienne said suddenly. "This is my fault. If I hadn't agreed to marry him in the first place, you did what you had to do to survive," Wade interrupted firmly. "The blame lies with Blackburn, not you. Never you." Vivienne's throat tightened with emotion at his defense of her. "Why did you do it?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since he had appeared in the church doorway. "Why give up everything you worked for to help me?" Wade was silent for a long moment, gazing up at the stars that blanketed the night sky. "When I first arrived in Portland," he finally said, "I saw you in the market. You were helping an elderly woman who had dropped her basket, gathering her things even though you were clearly in a hurry yourself. Later, I watched you extend credit to a widow who couldn't afford a new bonnet for her daughter's birthday. Small kindnesses that revealed your character." He turned to look at her directly. "Then I heard about your engagement to Blackburn. The whole town knew it wasn't a love match, that he was essentially collecting on your father's debts by taking you as payment. I saw the light in your eyes dim a little more each day as the wedding approached." Wade shook his head, as if clearing away the memory. "When I saw you running from the church that day, looking like a trapped animal, I knew I couldn't stand by. Some things are worth more than money or land." "Like what?" Vivienne asked softly. "Like knowing you did the right thing when it mattered," Wade answered. "Like helping someone who deserves a chance at happiness." His words wrapped around her heart like a warm blanket. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay your kindness," she said. "I'm not looking for repayment," Wade assured her. "Just partnership. A chance to build something worthwhile together." Their eyes met in the darkness, and Vivienne felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or gratitude. It was something new, something hopeful, something that made her wonder if perhaps their marriage of convenience might one day become something more. The days blended together as they continued their journey. They crossed from Oregon into Idaho territory, then turned southeast toward Colorado. The land changed around them, forests giving way to high plains and rocky outcroppings as they approached the Rocky Mountains. They developed a rhythm together, Wade handling the horses and hunting for fresh meat when possible, Vivienne preparing meals and keeping their few possessions organized. They took turns driving the wagon and keeping watch at night, learning to read each other's habits and preferences without having to ask. One evening, as they made camp near a small creek, Wade announced, "We'll reach Denver in about 3 days if the weather holds." "Denver?" Vivienne asked, looking up from where she was kneeling by the creek, washing their cooking pot. "Is that our destination?" Wade shook his head. "Just a stopping point. I've heard there's good land available south of there near a place called Pine Creek. Affordable with enough water and grazing land for cattle." "How long since you've seen it?" Vivienne asked. "I haven't," Wade admitted, "but I've talked to men who have. It's supposed to be good country for a small outfit to get started." Vivienne nodded thoughtfully. "Then I suppose we'll see it together for the first time." "Together," Wade echoed, and there was something in the way he said it that made Vivienne's cheeks warm despite the cool evening air. As predicted, they reached Denver 3 days later. The bustling frontier town was a welcome change from the isolation of the trail. They took rooms at a modest boarding house, separate rooms, as Wade insisted on propriety despite their technical status as an engaged couple. "We haven't actually married yet," he reminded her when she protested the expense of 2 rooms. "And your reputation matters, especially if we're setting up in a new community." Vivienne was touched by his consideration, though part of her wondered if he was having second thoughts about their arrangement. As she settled into her room, the first real bed she'd slept in since leaving Portland, she contemplated the complicated situation they had created. They were engaged to be married, yet had never courted. They were planning a life together, yet were still learning the most basic things about each other. They had fled together across state lines, yet had never so much as shared a kiss. The following morning, as they ate breakfast in the boarding house dining room, Wade broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind as well. "I think we should marry here in Denver," he said quietly, ensuring the other diners couldn't overhear, "before we continue to Pine Creek. It would be proper." Vivienne set down her coffee cup carefully. "I agree," she said, surprised by the sudden nervousness she felt. "When? Today, if possible," Wade replied. "We can find a minister, purchase rings if you wish, make it official before we continue our journey." "Today," Vivienne repeated, her mouth suddenly dry. "Yes, that would be sensible." Wade studied her face, concern evident in his gray eyes. "Vivienne, if you've changed your mind about any of this, I would understand. We could make other arrangements." "No," she interrupted firmly. "I haven't changed my mind. We made an agreement and I intend to honor it." Something flickered in Wade's expression, disappointment perhaps, before he nodded. "Very well. I'll make the arrangements while you visit the mercantile. We need supplies anyway, and perhaps you might find a dress more suitable for a wedding than your traveling clothes." 2 hours later, Vivienne stood before a small mirror in her boarding house room, smoothing the skirt of the new dress she had purchased, a simple but pretty blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. It wasn't the fine silk wedding gown that Blackburn had paid for, but somehow it felt more appropriate for the woman she was becoming. A knock at her door startled her from her reverie. "Miss Vaughan," came Wade's voice. "The minister is ready whenever we are." Vivienne took a deep breath, pinched her cheeks for color, and opened the door. Wade stood in the hallway, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt with his usual denim trousers and boots. In his hand was a small bouquet of wildflowers. "These are for you," he said, offering them with an almost shy smile. "I thought you might like them for the ceremony." The simple gesture touched her deeply. "They're beautiful," she said, taking the flowers. "Thank you." Wade's eyes traveled over her new dress, appreciation evident in his gaze. "You look lovely," he said softly. Vivienne felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." An awkward silence fell between them, broken finally when Wade cleared his throat. "Shall we go? The minister is waiting at the small church near the town square." The ceremony itself was brief and unadorned. The minister, a kind-faced older man, read the traditional vows while Vivienne and Wade repeated them. A simple gold band purchased that morning from a Denver jeweler was slipped onto Vivienne's finger. Two strangers from the street were recruited as witnesses. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." Wade hesitated, his eyes searching Vivienne's for permission. She gave a slight nod, her heart pounding as he leaned forward and gently pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief, chaste, yet Vivienne felt a jolt of something unexpected pass between them, a spark of possibility that lingered even after Wade pulled away. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Quincy," the minister said, beaming at them. "May God bless your union, Mrs. Quincy." The name struck Vivienne as both foreign and strangely right. She was no longer Vivienne Vaughan, the struggling milliner burdened by her father's debts and Blackburn's threats. She was Vivienne Quincy, wife of a rancher, headed for a new life in Pine Creek. They signed the marriage certificate, thanked the minister, and stepped back into the autumn sunshine as husband and wife. "Well," Wade said, offering her his arm, "would you like to celebrate with a proper meal? There's a restaurant near the boarding house that's supposed to be quite good." "I'd like that very much," Vivienne replied, slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. As they walked through the streets of Denver, she was acutely aware of the gold band on her finger and the tall, steady man at her side. The restaurant was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and actual glassware instead of tin cups. Wade ordered roast beef with potatoes and vegetables, while Vivienne chose chicken and dumplings. When the waiter asked if they were celebrating a special occasion, Wade answered with a simple, "We were married today." The news resulted in complimentary apple pie and coffee after their meal, along with well wishes from the restaurant owner and several patrons. "Is this how you imagined your wedding day?" Wade asked as they lingered over their coffee. Vivienne considered the question. "No," she admitted. "But then, I never gave it much thought. After my parents died and the debts mounted, marriage seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford to dream about." "And now," Wade prompted gently. "Now," Vivienne said, meeting his gaze, "I find myself married to a good man who rescued me from a terrible fate, crossing a country to start a new life. It's not what I imagined, but perhaps it's better than any dream I might have had." Something softened in Wade's expression. "I want to be worthy of that trust," he said, his voice low and serious. "I want to build a good life for us, Vivienne." The sincerity in his words made her throat tight with emotion. This was no love match, she reminded herself, but perhaps it could become a true partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Maybe, in time, even something more. They returned to the boarding house as evening fell, an awkward tension growing between them as they approached their rooms, now a single shared room, as befitted their married status. "I'll give you privacy to prepare for bed," Wade said stiffly, once they were inside with the door closed behind them. "I can wait in the hallway." "That's not necessary," Vivienne replied, though her heart fluttered nervously. "You could simply turn your back while I change into my nightclothes." Wade nodded, turning to face the wall while Vivienne quickly changed behind the small privacy screen in the corner. When she emerged in her modest white nightgown, she found Wade still staring resolutely at the wall. "You can turn around now," she said softly. When he did, his gaze fell on her for just a moment before he politely averted his eyes. "I'll change now, if you don't mind." Vivienne nodded and turned her back, listening to the rustle of clothing as Wade changed into what she assumed were his night clothes. The small sounds made the reality of their situation suddenly, intensely real. They were married. They were about to share a bed. They were, in the eyes of God and the law, husband and wife. "You can turn around," Wade's voice broke into her thoughts. Vivienne turned to find him wearing a simple cotton undershirt and long underwear bottoms. He stood awkwardly beside the bed, which suddenly seemed very small for two people. "I can sleep on the floor," he offered, "or in the chair." Vivienne glanced at the hard wooden floor and the uncomfortable-looking chair in the corner. "That's not necessary," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "The bed is adequate for both of us." Wade's eyes searched hers. "Are you certain? I don't want to make you uncomfortable." "We're married," Vivienne pointed out. "Sharing a bed is expected." A flush crept up Wade's neck. "Vivienne, I want to be clear about something. When I proposed this arrangement, I meant it to be a practical partnership. I don't expect. That is, I wouldn't presume." Understanding dawned, and Vivienne felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. "You're a gentleman, Wade Quincy," she said softly. "And I appreciate that more than I can say, but we can at least share the bed for sleeping. It will be a long journey to Pine Creek, and you need proper rest as much as I do." Relief and something else, disappointment perhaps, flickered across Wade's features before he nodded. "As you wish." They settled into the bed with careful movements, each staying firmly on their respective sides. Vivienne lay rigid, acutely aware of Wade's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the sound of his breathing in the darkness. "Good night, Vivienne," he said softly. "Good night, Wade," she replied, certain that sleep would be impossible with him so near. Yet somehow, lulled by the exhaustion of their journey and the emotional weight of the day, Vivienne drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke the next morning, she found herself curled against Wade's side, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. For a moment, she remained perfectly still, studying his face in repose. The strong line of his jaw softened in sleep, the dark lashes that rested against his cheeks, the slight furrow between his brows as if he carried his concerns even in dreams. Carefully, not wanting to wake him, Vivienne eased out from under his arm and slipped from the bed. As she dressed for the day, she considered the strange path her life had taken. A month ago, she had been preparing to marry Silas Blackburn out of desperate necessity. Now she was Mrs. Wade Quincy, traveling to a place she'd never seen to start a life she'd never imagined. And yet, as she glanced at Wade's sleeping form, she couldn't bring herself to regret any of it. 2 days later, they departed Denver, their wagon loaded with supplies for their new home. Seeds for planting, tools, household necessities, and a few modest luxuries that Wade had insisted Vivienne select from the mercantile. "Are you nervous?" Wade asked as the town receded behind them and they headed south toward Pine Creek. "A little," Vivienne admitted, "but more excited than afraid. It feels like we're finally moving towards something, not just running away." Wade's smile warmed his usually serious face. "That's how I feel as well. Pine Creek is supposed to be good country, fertile soil, reliable water, enough open range for cattle." "How many cattle will we start with?" Vivienne asked, realizing she knew very little about Wade's plans for their ranch. "I've got enough saved to purchase maybe 20 head, Wade replied. "A small start, but enough to begin building a herd. With careful management and a bit of luck, we could double that in a year or two." Vivienne nodded thoughtfully. And will we grow crops as well? For ourselves, at least. Definitely, Wade said. A vegetable garden at minimum, perhaps some grain if the soil proves suitable. Self-sufficiency is key in places like Pine Creek. The nearest town is half a day's ride. Half a day, Vivienne echoed, surprised. She had grown up in a town, had always had neighbors and shops within walking distance. Wade glanced at her, concern in his eyes. Is that too isolated for you? I should have mentioned it sooner. No, Vivienne said quickly. It's just an adjustment I'll need to make. I'm not afraid of hard work or solitude. She paused, then added with a smile, besides, I won't be alone. I'll have you. The simple statement seemed to please Wade enormously. That's right, he agreed. We'll have each other. The journey to Pine Creek took 3 more days, winding through increasingly rugged but beautiful country. As they crested a ridge on the afternoon of the 3rd day, Wade pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Pine Creek. Vivienne followed his gaze, taking in the verdant valley nestled between gentle hills. A clear creek meandered through it, bordered by stands of pine trees that gave the place its name. The land opened into grassy meadows perfect for grazing cattle, and she could see a flat area near the creek that would be ideal for building a home. It's beautiful, she breathed, genuine awe in her voice. Better than I hoped, Wade agreed, his eyes scanning the landscape with a rancher's practical assessment. Good water, good grass, natural shelter for the stock in those trees. What do you think, Mrs. Quincy? Could this be home? The question, asked with such hopeful earnestness, touched Vivienne deeply. I think it could be a wonderful home, she replied truthfully. They made their way down to the valley floor, following the creek until they reached a spot that Wade deemed perfect for their homestead, a slight rise that would stay dry during spring runoff, close to water but not so close as to risk flooding, with good visibility in all directions. We'll build here, he declared, helping Vivienne down from the wagon. The house facing east to catch the morning sun, barn to the north to block the winter winds. Vivienne turned in a slow circle, trying to envision the home that would rise on this empty patch of ground. How soon can we start building? She asked. First things first, Wade replied. We need to file a claim on this land. I'll ride to the nearest land office tomorrow to start the paperwork. Until we can build a proper house, we'll live in the wagon and a tent. A tent. Vivienne repeated, a hint of apprehension in her voice. Wade chuckled at her expression. It won't be so bad. Many settlers start with less, and I promise we'll have a real house before winter sets in. As Wade unpacked the canvas tent and began setting it up, Vivienne explored the immediate area, mentally placing the garden, thinking about where a chicken coop might go, imagining the view from the porch of the house that didn't yet exist. By sunset, they had established a basic camp, the tent for sleeping, a fire pit for cooking, and the wagon serving as both storage and shelter for their supplies. They ate a simple supper of beans and salt pork, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. I've never seen so many stars, Vivienne remarked, craning her neck to take in the celestial display. No town lights to dim them, Wade explained. Just one of the benefits of country living. As the night grew cooler, they retired to the tent. It was more spacious than Vivienne had expected, with room for their bedrolls and a small lantern that cast a warm glow over the canvas walls. It's not the boarding house, Wade said apologetically as he removed his boots, but it's weatherproof. You'll be comfortable enough. It's perfect, Vivienne assured him, settling onto her bedroll. Our first home. Wade's expression softened at her words. The first of many improvements to come, he promised. They lay side by side in the tent, closer than they had been in the boarding house bed due to the confined space. Vivienne was acutely aware of Wade's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to hers. "Wade," she whispered into the darkness after the lantern had been extinguished. "Yes," came his immediate response, telling her he was as awake as she was. "Thank you for bringing me here, for giving me this chance at a new life." There was a pause, then she felt his hand find hers in the darkness, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come," he replied, his voice low and earnest. They fell asleep that way, hands joined, under a canopy of stars in a valley that would become their home. The next morning, Wade departed early for the land office, leaving Vivienne to organize their camp and begin planning their garden. She spent the day clearing a patch of ground near the creek, testing the soil and making lists of what they would need to properly establish their homestead. When Wade returned late that afternoon, his expression was triumphant. "It's official," he announced, pulling a document from his saddlebag. 160 acres, registered under the names of Wade and Vivienne Quincy. 160 acres, Vivienne repeated, amazed. "That's more than I expected." "It's a standard homestead claim," Wade explained. "The government grants the land to settlers willing to improve it. After 5 years, if we've built a dwelling and cultivated the land, it becomes ours permanently." "And if we don't?" Vivienne asked. "Then we lose the claim," Wade said simply. "But I have no intention of failing, Vivienne. This land will be our legacy." The word legacy hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. A legacy implied children, family, generations, a future that stretched far beyond the two of them standing in a half-built camp. "I stopped in the nearest settlement, too," Wade continued, unpacking his saddlebags. "Pine Creek Junction. It's small but growing. They have a general store, a blacksmith, even a small church. And best of all, I found men willing to help us build our house. They'll be here in 3 days." "So soon?" Vivienne asked, surprised by how quickly things were moving. "Winter comes early in these mountains," Wade reminded her. "We need solid walls and a roof before the first snow." True to his word, 3 days later 4 men arrived with tools and a wagon loaded with lumber. Wade had already staked out the dimensions of the house, a modest 2-room cabin with a stone fireplace that could be expanded as their needs grew. For the next 2 weeks, Vivienne watched in amazement as their home took shape. The men worked from dawn to dusk, raising walls, setting roof beams, constructing the stone chimney that would be their source of heat and cooking. She did her part by preparing meals for the workers, helping where she could with the construction, and continuing to develop their garden plot. By the time the men departed, the cabin was weather-tight and functional, if still rough around the edges. "It's not fancy," Wade said as they stood together in what would be their main living area, "but it's solid. We can add refinements over time." Vivienne turned in a slow circle, taking in the plank floors, the simple windows, the stone fireplace that dominated one wall. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. "Our first real home." Wade smiled, pleased by her approval. "I'll finish the interior while you set up the household. And soon, I'll need to travel to purchase our first cattle." "How long will you be gone?" Vivienne asked, surprised by the pang of anxiety she felt at the prospect of Wade's absence. "A week, perhaps a bit more," he replied. "I'll need to find a good herd, negotiate a fair price, and drive them back here." "And I'll be here alone," Vivienne clarified, trying to keep her voice steady. Wade studied her face, then stepped closer. "Are you afraid to stay alone, Vivienne?" "If you are, I can delay the cattle purchase until spring." "No," she said quickly, not wanting to interfere with their plans. I've never been so isolated before. "You'll have a rifle," Wade assured her. "I'll teach you to use it properly before I go. And our nearest neighbors are just 5 miles down the creek. The Andersons, I met them when I registered our claim. Good people." Vivienne nodded, embarrassed by her momentary weakness. "Of course. I'll be fine. There's plenty to do here to keep me occupied." The following weeks were a flurry of activity as they settled into their new home and prepared for Wade's journey to purchase cattle. True to his word, he taught Vivienne to handle the Winchester rifle, patiently guiding her until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. "Remember," he instructed as they practiced, "it's not just for protection. You might need to hunt for food if your supplies run low before I return." Vivienne nodded solemnly, understanding the responsibility she was taking on. This wasn't Portland, where food could be purchased at a moment's notice. Here, self-sufficiency wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. The day before Wade was set to depart, Vivienne surprised him with a special dinner. She had been hoarding certain supplies for this occasion: a bit of sugar, some dried apples, the last of their coffee. She prepared a meal of rabbit stew from a rabbit Wade had caught, corn bread, and a simple apple cobbler for dessert. "What's the occasion?" Wade asked as he entered the cabin and found the table set with their best tin plates and cups. "A proper send-off," Vivienne explained. "To wish you safe travels." Something flickered in Wade's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or surprise at her thoughtfulness. "It smells wonderful," he said, washing his hands in the basin by the door before taking his seat at the table. They ate in companionable silence, both acutely aware that it would be their last meal together for some time. When they had finished, Wade helped Vivienne clear the dishes, their movements in the small cabin a careful dance of domestic harmony they had developed over their weeks together. "I have something for you," Wade said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. "I've been saving it for the right moment." He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Vivienne accepted it curiously, untying the string and folding back the paper to reveal a delicate silver locket. "Oh, Wade," she breathed, lifting the locket from its wrapping. "It's beautiful." "I bought it in Denver," he explained, watching her face closely. "I wanted you to have something personal from me, to remember that you're not just my business partner but my wife." The distinction sent a warm flush through Vivienne's chest. She opened the locket to find it empty, waiting for contents. "I thought perhaps, when I return, we might have a photograph made in Pine Creek Junction," Wade continued. "Something to put inside." Vivienne closed the locket and clutched it tightly in her palm. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Would you help me put it on?" Wade stepped behind her, taking the delicate chain from her hands. Vivienne lifted her hair, exposing the nape of her neck as Wade fastened the locket. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn chill in the air. "Thank you," she said, turning to face him. They stood closer than they usually allowed themselves, the silver locket gleaming against the fabric of her dress. "Vivienne," Wade began, his voice lower than usual, "these past weeks—" Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by a sudden clap of thunder that shook the cabin walls. They both startled, the intimate moment broken. "Sounds like a storm's coming," Wade observed, moving toward the window. "A bad one from the looks of those clouds." Vivienne followed his gaze, noting the dark thunderheads rolling in from the west. "Will it delay your departure?" "Not unless it lasts through tomorrow," Wade replied. "The cattle can wait an extra day if necessary, but I'd rather not lose any more time. Winter will be here before we know it." The storm that night was fierce, rain lashing at the cabin windows and thunder shaking the newly built walls. Vivienne was grateful for the solid roof over their heads, and the warmth of the fireplace that kept the worst of the chill at bay. Morning brought clearing skies and Wade's departure. He loaded his saddlebags with supplies for the journey, checked and rechecked his gear, and gave Vivienne detailed instructions for every possible emergency that might arise in his absence. "Remember, the Andersons are just down the creek if you need help," he reminded her for the third time. "And keep the rifle loaded but out of the weather." "I'll be fine, Wade," Vivienne assured him, touched by his concern. "Focus on finding us good cattle at a fair price." Finally, with no more reasons to delay, Wade mounted his horse. He looked down at Vivienne, standing in the doorway of their cabin, her hand unconsciously touching the silver locket at her throat. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised. "I'll be waiting," she replied simply. Wade hesitated, then leaned down from the saddle. For a moment, Vivienne thought he might properly kiss her, not the chaste peck they had shared at their wedding. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her cheek, his eyes conveying what he couldn't seem to put into words. Then he straightened, tipped his hat, and rode away. Vivienne watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back to the cabin that suddenly seemed much emptier without his presence. The first 2 days of Wade's absence passed uneventfully. Vivienne kept busy organizing their supplies, sewing curtains for the windows from fabric she had purchased in Denver, and tending to the garden she had started. On the third day, she decided to explore more of their property, following the creek upstream to where it emerged from a stand of pines. The autumn air was crisp, the sky a brilliant blue, and for a while she simply sat on a sun-warmed rock, listening to the water and watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. It was there, in that peaceful moment, that Vivienne admitted to herself what she had been avoiding acknowledging. She missed Wade, not just his help or his protection, but his quiet presence, his rare smiles, the sound of his voice in the evenings as they discussed their plans for the ranch. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement between virtual strangers, had somehow evolved into something more complicated. Not love, perhaps not yet, but the beginnings of genuine affection, of partnership that went beyond the merely practical. Would Wade welcome such a development? He had been unfailingly kind and respectful, but also careful to maintain certain boundaries between them. Was that out of consideration for her comfort? Or did it reflect his own preference for keeping their relationship strictly businesslike? These questions occupied Vivienne's thoughts as she made her way back to the cabin. So distracted was she that she almost missed the signs of an intruder. The cabin door, which she had closed firmly behind her, now standing slightly ajar. She froze, heart pounding. Her rifle was inside the cabin, leaning against the wall near the door. If someone had broken in while she was away, she had no way to defend herself. For a moment, Vivienne considered running to the Andersons' homestead for help. But that would mean a 5-mile journey on foot, and whoever was in their cabin might be long gone along with their supplies by the time she returned with assistance. Drawing a deep breath, she crept closer to the cabin, listening intently. No sounds came from within. Perhaps the wind had blown the door open. But there was barely a breeze today. Gathering her courage, Vivienne pushed the door wider and peered inside. The cabin appeared empty, though items had been moved. The flour sack was open on the table, a tin cup lay on the floor, and Wade's spare boots had been pulled from beneath the bed. "Hello," she called cautiously. "Is anyone here?" No response came. Vivienne entered slowly, her eyes scanning every corner. The cabin was small enough that there were few places for someone to hide, and after a thorough check, she concluded that the intruder had departed. A quick inventory revealed that nothing of significant value had been taken. Some food was missing: bread, jerky, An apple and one of Wade's shirts had disappeared from the peg where it hung. It seemed the intruder had been hungry and in need of clothing rather than looking to steal valuables. Still, the violation of their home left Vivienne shaken. She secured the door as best she could, using a chair wedged under the handle for additional protection, and kept the loaded rifle close at hand for the remainder of the day and through the night. She slept poorly, startling awake at every creak and rustle. By morning, exhaustion had left her with a headache and frayed nerves. She was standing at the basin, splashing cold water on her face when a knock at the door nearly caused her heart to stop. Grabbing the rifle, she approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" She called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mrs. Quincy," came a woman's voice. "It's Sarah Anderson from down the creek. Are you all right?" Relief flooded through Vivienne as she recognized the name of their neighbor. She moved the chair and opened the door to find a sturdy woman in her 40s standing on the porch, concern evident in her weathered face. "Mrs. Anderson," Vivienne greeted her, lowering the rifle. "Please come in." "I'm sorry for the caution, but someone broke into the cabin yesterday while I was out." Sarah Anderson's expression grew serious as she stepped inside. "That's precisely why I'm here," she said. "My husband spotted a stranger in the area yesterday, a rough-looking fellow heading this way. We were concerned. He took some food and one of my husband's shirts," Vivienne explained, gesturing to the still open flour sack. "Nothing valuable, thankfully." "Likely a drifter passing through," Mrs. Anderson said, helping Vivienne clean up the mess left by the intruder. "Though it's unusual to see them this far from the main trails. Where is your husband, if you don't mind my asking?" "He's gone to purchase cattle," Vivienne replied. "He should return within a few days." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you should stay with us until he returns. It's not good for a woman to be alone out here, especially after something like this." The offer was tempting, but Vivienne hesitated. Wade had entrusted her with their home, and fleeing at the first sign of trouble seemed like a failure. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I should stay here. I have responsibilities, the garden, our supplies." "At least let my son ride by each day to check on you," Sarah insisted. "Benjamin is 15 but handy with a rifle. It would ease my mind." This compromise Vivienne could accept. "Thank you. I would appreciate that." After Sarah departed, promising to send Benjamin the next morning, Vivienne set about strengthening the cabin's security. She checked the hinges on the door and windows, found a piece of wood that could be wedged against the door frame for additional protection, and kept the rifle close at hand. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the wind in the pines, Vivienne found herself longing for Wade's return with an intensity that surprised her. It wasn't just the security of his presence she missed, but the man himself, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the way his rare smiles transformed his serious face. "Come home soon," she whispered into the darkness, her fingers finding the silver locket that hung around her neck. "Come home to me." 4 more days passed without incident. True to his word, young Benjamin Anderson rode by each morning to check on Vivienne, sometimes staying to help with heavier tasks around the homestead. The intruder did not return, and gradually Vivienne's anxiety eased. On the morning of the 8th day after Wade's departure, Vivienne was hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 pine trees when Benjamin arrived, his usual cheerful greeting replaced with evident excitement. "Mrs. Quincy, your husband's coming back and he's bringing cattle with him." Vivienne's heart leaped at the news. She shaded her eyes against the morning sun, looking in the direction Benjamin pointed. In the distance, a dust cloud indicated movement, a small herd of cattle making their way across the valley floor, with riders flanking them. "They'll be here within the hour," Benjamin informed her, clearly pleased to be the bearer of such welcome news. "Thank you, Benjamin," Vivienne said, unable to contain her smile. "Would you like to stay and see the cattle arrive?" The boy nodded eagerly, and together they waited, watching as the herd drew steadily closer. Vivienne found herself growing increasingly nervous, smoothing her hair and straightening her apron as if preparing to receive an important visitor rather than her own husband. Finally, the cattle came into clear view, 20 or so head of sturdy longhorns moving at a steady pace, guided by Wade and another man on horseback. The sight of Wade, sitting tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low against the sun, sent an unexpected thrill through Vivienne. As the herd approached the area Wade had designated for their corral, a section of meadow partially enclosed by natural rock formations, he spotted Vivienne and Benjamin waiting by the cabin. He raised a hand in greeting, a gesture Vivienne returned with perhaps more enthusiasm than she had intended. It took another hour to get the cattle settled. Vivienne brought water for the men and watched as Wade and his companion introduced as Matt Taylor. A cattle driver hired to help with the journey erected a temporary fence to contain the herd until a proper corral could be built. When the work was finally done, Matt departed for Pine Creek Junction, promising to return in a few days to help with the corral construction. Wade walked slowly toward the cabin, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "Welcome home," Vivienne said, suddenly shy as he approached. Wade's tired face broke into a genuine smile. "It's good to be back," he replied, his gaze taking in the cabin, the garden, and finally Vivienne herself. "Everything all right here?" There was a moment when Vivienne considered not telling him about the intruder, not wanting to worry him after his long journey. But their partnership was built on honesty, and she would not begin undermining that now. "We had a visitor," she said, gesturing for Wade to follow her into the cabin. "Nothing was stolen except food and one of your shirts, but it was unsettling." Wade's expression darkened as she related the full story. "You should have gone to the Andersons," he said, concern evident in his voice. "I considered it," Vivienne admitted, "but this is our home, Wade. I couldn't just abandon it." Her words seemed to affect him deeply. He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're more important than anything in this cabin, Vivienne. If there's ever danger, I want you safe above all else." The intensity of his concern warmed her from within. "I was careful," she assured him, "and Benjamin checked on me every day." Wade nodded, accepting this with visible effort. "I'll make improvements to the door and windows tomorrow. No one will find it so easy to enter next time." "Tomorrow?" Vivienne questioned. "Shouldn't you rest after your journey?" "Security first," Wade insisted. "Rest can wait." Vivienne recognized the stubborn set of his jaw and knew further argument would be futile. "At least let me prepare you a proper meal," she said. "You must be starving after the drive." As Wade washed away the dust of the trail, Vivienne busied herself with dinner preparations, acutely aware of his presence in a way she hadn't been before his departure. Every movement, every sound he made seemed amplified in her consciousness. Over dinner, Wade described his journey and the process of selecting their cattle. "They're good stock," he explained between bites of the stew Vivienne had prepared. "Healthy, strong, with good bloodlines. The start of something significant." "You've done wonderfully," Vivienne said sincerely. 20 head is more than we'd hoped for." 22, Wade corrected with a small smile, "including 2 pregnant cows that should calve in the spring." "Even better," Vivienne replied, pleased by his evident satisfaction with the purchase. As they ate, Wade's gaze kept returning to the silver locket that hung at Vivienne's throat. "You're wearing it," he observed quietly. Vivienne's fingers went to the locket automatically. "Of course," It's beautiful and it reminded me of you while you were away. Something flickered in Wade's eyes, pleasure perhaps, or something deeper. I thought of you often during the journey, he admitted. Wondered how you were faring here alone. Not entirely alone, Vivienne corrected. I had the memory of your instructions ringing in my ears. Her teasing tone made it clear she was gently mocking his detailed guidance before his departure. Wade chuckled, a rare sound that Vivienne realized she had missed tremendously. Was I that overbearing, protective, she corrected, which I appreciate, even when it verges on excessive. Their conversation flowed easily through dinner and into the evening, catching up on all that had happened during their separation. As night fell, the familiar awkwardness returned as they prepared for bed, the same careful choreography of turned backs and averted eyes they had established in their early days together. Yet something had changed, subtle but undeniable. As they lay side by side in the darkness, Vivienne was more conscious than ever of the mere inches separating them, of the warmth of Wade's body, of the rhythm of his breathing. "Vivienne," Wade's voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "Yes," she responded, her heart suddenly beating faster. "I was worried about you," he confessed. "Every night on the trail I thought about what might happen if you were in danger and I wasn't here to protect you." "I managed," Vivienne reminded him. "I'm stronger than I look." "I know," Wade said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You've proven that time and again. Still, he hesitated, seeming to search for words. "I've grown accustomed to your presence, more than accustomed. I missed you." The simple admission made Vivienne's breath catch. "I missed you too," she whispered, "more than I expected to." In the darkness, she felt Wade's hand find hers, his fingers intertwining with hers as they had that first night in the tent. This time, however, there was a deliberate quality to the gesture, a meaning that hadn't been there before. "We should sleep," Wade said finally, though he didn't release her hand. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Good night, Wade," Vivienne replied, squeezing his hand gently. "Good night, Vivienne," he answered, returning the pressure of her fingers. Neither let go until sleep claimed them both. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity to the Quincy homestead. With Matt Taylor's help, Wade constructed a proper corral for the cattle and began planning for a barn that would shelter them during the harshest winter weather. Vivienne expanded the garden, preserved the last of the autumn vegetables, and continued making improvements to the cabin interior. Their relationship evolved as well. Small changes that might have been imperceptible to an outside observer, but were profoundly significant to them. Wade began to seek out opportunities to touch Vivienne a hand at the small of her back as he passed behind her, fingers brushing as they worked together. A strand of hair gently tucked behind her ear when the wind displaced it. Vivienne found herself doing the same, creating moments of connection that grew more frequent and less tentative with each passing day. Their conversations deepened too, moving beyond the practical concerns of the ranch to personal histories, hopes, and dreams. Vivienne learned about Wade's childhood in Missouri, his years working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, the patient accumulation of savings that had finally brought him to Oregon with plans to start his own ranch. Wade heard about Vivienne's sheltered upbringing in Portland, her mother's patient instruction in the millinery trade, the devastating loss of both parents to influenza when she was 20, and the struggle to keep the shop afloat amid mounting debts. "I wish I'd known you then," Wade said one evening as they sat before the fireplace, Vivienne sewing and Wade whittling a piece of pine into what was gradually taking the shape of a small horse. "Before Blackburn forced your hand. You saved me from him," Vivienne reminded him. "That's what matters." Wade's hand stilled on his carving. "I've never asked, was it very terrible, the time with him before the wedding?" Vivienne set down her sewing, choosing her words carefully. Silas Blackburn was calculating. He didn't mistreat me openly, he was too concerned with appearances for that. But there was always an undercurrent of threat, a reminder that I was completely at his mercy. Did he ever? Wade began, then stopped, his jaw tightening. No, Vivienne assured him, understanding the unspoken question. He considered me property to be acquired, not damaged before the purchase was complete. She shuddered at the memory. Though I have no doubt that would have changed after the wedding. Wade's hands clenched around the carving knife. If I ever see him again, you won't, Vivienne interrupted firmly. We're hundreds of miles from Portland building a new life. Silas Blackburn is in the past where he belongs. Wade nodded, though the tension didn't fully leave his shoulders. You're right. I just can't bear the thought of anyone hurting you. No one is hurting me now, Vivienne said softly. Quite the opposite. Their eyes met across the small space between them, the firelight casting a warm glow over both their faces. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that day in the Portland church. Wade set aside his carving and moved to sit beside Vivienne on the bench. Vivienne, he began, his voice lower than usual. When I proposed our arrangement, I thought it would be a practical partnership. A way to protect you and give myself a chance at the ranch I've always wanted. It was a generous offer, Vivienne said, her heart beating faster at his proximity. But it's become more than that for me, Wade continued, his eyes never leaving hers. Much more. Vivienne's breath caught in her throat. For me as well, she admitted. Wade reached out, gently touching the silver locket that had become a constant presence around her neck. We still haven't put anything inside, he observed. We haven't had our photograph made yet, Vivienne reminded him. Perhaps we don't need one, Wade suggested. Perhaps there's something else that would be more meaningful. Before Vivienne could ask what he meant, Wade leaned forward and kissed her, not the chaste peck of their wedding day, but a real kiss, tender and questioning at first, then deepening as Vivienne responded. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing faster, a flush coloring Vivienne's cheeks and a new light in Wade's eyes. I've wanted to do that since Denver, Wade confessed, his voice rough with emotion. But I didn't want you to think I was like Blackburn, expecting things in return for my help. You are nothing like him, Vivienne assured him, her hand coming up to touch Wade's face. Nothing at all. This time it was Vivienne who initiated the kiss, her hand sliding from his cheek to the back of his neck, drawing him closer. Wade's arms encircled her waist, holding her as if she were something infinitely precious. When they parted again, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Vivienne Quincy, he whispered. The words sent a surge of joy through Vivienne's heart. I think I've already fallen in love with you, Wade Quincy, she replied. Their next kiss was deeper, more urgent, a physical expression of feelings that had been building for weeks. When Wade finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with desire but also with a question. We don't have to rush anything, he said gently. This is already more than I dared hope for. Vivienne studied his face in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his left eyebrow, the warmth in his gray eyes that had once seemed so stern. This was her husband, the man who had rescued her from a life of misery, who had given up his savings to free her from debt, who had treated her with unfailing respect and kindness. Wade, she said softly, taking his hand and rising to her feet. Take me to bed. Not as your business partner, but as your wife. Your real wife. The look of wonder and desire that crossed Wade's face was answer enough. He stood, drawing her into his arms for another kiss before sweeping her up and carrying her to their bed. That night, Their marriage was consummated in the truest sense, not as a legal transaction or practical arrangement, but as the physical expression of growing love between two people who had found each other against all odds. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Wade pressed a kiss to Vivienne's temple. "I have something to put in your locket," he said, reaching for his discarded trousers and retrieving a small object from the pocket. In the dim light from the banked fire, Vivienne could see it was a small curl of dark hair, Wade's hair, she realized, tied with a thread of red from her sewing basket. "A piece of me," he explained, "to keep close to your heart until we can have that photograph made." Tears pricked at Vivienne's eyes as she accepted the small token. "It's perfect," she whispered, opening the locket and carefully placing the lock of hair inside. "Now I'll always have you with me." Wade pulled her closer, his arms strong and protective around her. "Always," he echoed, the word a promise that encompassed far more than the silver locket or the small cabin, or even the ranch they were building together. It was a promise of a shared future, one they had both chosen freely, born not of necessity or convenience but of genuine love that had grown where neither had expected to find it. Winter arrived in Colorado territory with a fury that took Vivienne's breath away. The first snowfall came in early November, not the gentle dusting she had known in Portland, but a howling blizzard that coated the valley in 2 feet of snow overnight and drove the cattle into the sheltered areas of the property. "Is this normal?" she asked Wade as they stood at the cabin window, watching the white landscape transform their familiar valley. "For these mountains, yes," Wade replied, his arm around her waist. "We'll have several like this before spring. It's why I was so determined to get the barn built before the weather turned." The barn had been completed just in time, a sturdy structure that housed not only the most vulnerable cattle but also the 2 horses they had purchased, and the beginnings of a chicken coop that would eventually provide eggs and meat. Their cabin had been improved as well. Wade had added a lean-to for storing firewood, reinforced the door and window frames against both weather and potential intruders, and constructed simple furniture to make their home more comfortable: a proper table with benches, a rocking chair placed near the fireplace, shelves for Vivienne's growing collection of preserves and dried herbs. Most importantly, he had built a real bedstead to replace their original pallet on the floor, working in secret while Vivienne visited the Andersons and presenting it to her with shy pride upon her return. "It's not fancy," he had apologized, "but it's solid and more comfortable than sleeping on the ground." Vivienne had expressed her appreciation for the gift in ways that left Wade in no doubt of her pleasure, christening the new bed with a passion that still brought color to his cheeks when he recalled it. The winter storms brought a new rhythm to their lives. On days when the weather permitted, Wade checked on the cattle, chopped wood, and made repairs to their buildings. Vivienne kept the cabin running, cooked hearty meals from their stored supplies, and worked on sewing projects for their home and themselves. When storms confined them indoors, they found ways to pass the time together, reading aloud from the few books they owned, teaching each other games from their childhoods, talking for hours about their plans for the ranch come spring. And at night, they shared the bed Wade had built, their physical relationship deepening along with their emotional connection. What had begun as a tentative exploration had blossomed into a passionate and tender bond that both found increasingly essential to their happiness. "I never expected this," Wade confessed one night as they lay entwined beneath warm quilts, the wind howling outside their snug cabin. "When I stopped your wedding, I thought I was offering you safety, security. I never imagined that you would find love in the bargain." Vivienne finished for him, nestling closer against his chest. That I would find everything I never knew I was looking for, Wade corrected, pressing a kiss to her hair. Their contentment was interrupted in December by an unexpected visitor. Wade was checking on the cattle, and Vivienne was alone in the cabin when a knock came at the door. Wary since the break-in, she approached cautiously, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" she called. "U.S. Marshal Thomas Grant," came the reply. "I'm looking for Wade Quincy." Vivienne's heart stuttered in her chest. Had Silas Blackburn somehow tracked them down? Had he convinced the authorities that Wade had committed a crime? "My husband is tending the cattle," she answered, not opening the door. "What business do you have with him? Mrs. Quincy, I presume." The marshal called back. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm investigating a wanted man who might have passed through this area. Your husband may have information that could help." Vivienne hesitated, then unbarred the door. The man standing on the porch wore a heavy coat dusted with snow, a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his chest. He looked cold and tired, but not threatening. "Please come in, Marshal," she said, lowering the rifle but keeping it within reach. "My husband should return soon." The marshal entered gratefully, removing his hat and stomping snow from his boots. "Thank you, madam. It's bitter out there." Vivienne offered him coffee, which he accepted with evident appreciation. As he warmed himself by the fire, she studied him carefully, looking for any sign that his visit was connected to Blackburn. The marshal seemed genuine enough, his questions about the area and their homestead the casual conversation of a visitor rather than an interrogator. When Wade returned half an hour later, he tensed visibly at the sight of the badge on the marshal's chest. "Marshal," he greeted cautiously, moving to stand near Vivienne. "What brings you to our home?" "I'm tracking a fugitive," Grant explained, producing a wanted poster from inside his coat. "Illy Hardin, bank robber and murderer. He was spotted near Pine Creek Junction a week ago. I'm checking with all the homesteaders in the area to see if anyone's noticed strangers passing through." Wade relaxed slightly, taking the poster and studying the crude drawing of a bearded man with a scar across his cheek. "I haven't seen anyone matching this description," he said. "But we had a break-in while I was away purchasing cattle in October. Food and clothing taken, nothing else." The marshal's interest sharpened. "That fits Hardin's pattern. He's been targeting isolated homesteads for supplies. Did you get a look at him, Mrs. Quincy?" "No," Vivienne replied. "He was gone before I returned to the cabin." "Probably for the best," Grant said grimly. "Hardin doesn't leave witnesses when he can help it." Wade's arm went protectively around Vivienne's shoulders. "You think it was this Hardin who broke into our cabin?" "Can't say for certain, but it seems likely," the marshal replied. "I've been trailing him since he robbed a bank in Utah Territory and killed 2 people in the process. He's dangerous and he knows this country." "We'll keep a sharp lookout," Wade promised, his expression grave. "Do that," Grant advised. "And if you see anything suspicious, get word to the sheriff in Pine Creek Junction. He knows how to contact me." After providing a few more details about Hardin, the marshal departed, continuing his search through the valley. "Do you think it was really this Hardin who broke in?" Vivienne asked once the marshal had gone. "It makes sense," Wade said thoughtfully. "A desperate man on the run needing supplies. We're fortunate you weren't home when he came through." The knowledge that they had narrowly avoided an encounter with a dangerous criminal left both of them shaken. That night, Wade double-checked every lock and kept the rifle closer to hand than usual. "Perhaps we should consider getting a dog in the spring," Vivienne suggested as they lay in bed, listening to the winter wind. "For companionship and protection." "That's an excellent idea," Wade agreed, drawing her closer. "A good cattle dog would be useful anyway." The marshal's visit faded into memory as Christmas approached. Neither Wade nor Vivienne had celebrated properly in years, and both were determined to make their first Christmas together special despite their isolation and limited resources. Wade spent hours in the barn, working on a secret project he refused to let Vivienne see. She, in turn, used scraps of fabric to make him a new shirt, far more carefully constructed than his store-bought ones, with subtle embroidery around the collar and cuffs. On Christmas Eve, they decorated the cabin with pine boughs Wade had gathered, their fresh scent filling the small space. Vivienne baked a special dinner using precious supplies. They had been saving a small ham from a wild pig Wade had hunted in the fall, potatoes and carrots from their garden. And for dessert, a simple apple cobbler sweetened with the last of their sugar. "This is the finest Christmas dinner I've had in years," Wade declared, savoring each bite. "We'll have even better next year," Vivienne promised. "With cream for the cobbler from our own cow and more vegetables from a larger garden." After dinner, they exchanged their gifts. Vivienne presented Wade with the shirt, watching anxiously as he unfolded it and ran his fingers over the careful stitching. "This is beautiful," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Far too fine for ranch work." "You'll need proper clothes when we go to town for social occasions," Vivienne explained. "You're a successful rancher now, or will be soon. You should look the part." Wade smiled at her confidence in their future success. "Thank you," he said simply, leaning across the table to kiss her. "Now for your gift." He disappeared into the lean-to and returned carrying something covered with an old blanket. Setting it before Vivienne, he removed the covering to reveal a rocking chair, not the rough, functional piece he had made for the fireside, but a beautifully crafted chair with graceful curves and a polished finish. "Wade," Vivienne breathed, running her hand over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite." "I wanted you to have something special," he said, watching her face closely. "Something that was made just for you with care and love." The last word hung in the air between them, not the first time it had been spoken, but somehow weighted with new significance on this night. "I love it," Vivienne said softly. "And I love you, Wade Quincy." Wade drew her to her feet and into his arms. "I love you, Vivienne Quincy, more than I ever thought possible." Their kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate. Without breaking apart, they moved toward their bed, celebrating Christmas Eve in the most intimate way possible, not as two people thrown together by circumstance, but as husband and wife deeply in love. January brought more snow and an unexpected development. Vivienne began to experience morning sickness. At first, she attributed it to a winter chill, or perhaps something she had eaten. But as the symptoms persisted, and she realized her monthly cycle had not appeared since November, the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. The realization filled her with a mixture of joy and trepidation. A baby was a blessing, the natural progression of their deepening relationship. But a birth far from town, in the isolation of their mountain valley, carried risks she could not ignore. For several days, Vivienne kept her suspicions to herself, observing Wade as he worked around the homestead, trying to gauge how he might react to the news. Would he be pleased? Worried? Would he see a child as a welcome addition to their family, or an additional burden while they were still establishing their ranch? She finally broached the subject one evening as they sat before the fire, Wade reading a newspaper he had brought back from Pine Creek Junction, Vivienne working on a quilt. "Wade," she began, setting aside her sewing, "I have something important to tell you." He looked up from his paper, concern immediately crossing his face at her serious tone. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong," Vivienne assured him, "but significant." She took a deep breath. "I believe I'm expecting a child, our child, in the late summer, probably August." Wade stared at her for a long moment, the newspaper forgotten in his hands. Then, with a suddenness that startled her, he was on his knees beside her chair, his arms around her waist, his face pressed against her still flat abdomen. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby." Relief and happiness flooded through Vivienne. She ran her fingers through his dark hair, cradling his head against her. "You're pleased, then?" Wade looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," he said. "Overjoyed, terrified, grateful, all at once." "Terrified," Vivienne echoed, though she understood the feeling well. "We're so far from town, from a doctor," Wade explained, voicing her own concerns. "What if something goes wrong?" "Sarah Anderson has delivered many babies," Vivienne reminded him. "She's already offered to help when the time comes. And by August, the weather will be favorable for travel if we need to reach Pine Creek Junction." Wade nodded, though worry still creased his brow. "We'll take every precaution," he promised. "And I'll make sure you have everything you need for a safe delivery and a healthy baby." True to his word, Wade became even more protective and attentive as the winter progressed into spring. He insisted on taking over the heaviest chores, built a cradle that could be placed near their bed, and made a special trip to Pine Creek Junction to purchase fabric for baby clothes and a book on childbirth that became Vivienne's constant reading material. As Vivienne's body changed with her advancing pregnancy, their physical relationship adapted but remained deeply satisfying. Wade treated her with a reverent tenderness that sometimes made her laugh. "I'm not made of glass," she teased him one night as he hesitated to embrace her fully. "The baby is well protected." "I know," Wade acknowledged, "but you're carrying something so precious. I can't help being careful." The winter snow finally began to recede in late March, revealing a landscape transformed. The creek ran high with snowmelt, new grass began to appear in the meadows, and the cattle, thin from winter but healthy, eagerly grazed on the fresh growth. With spring came new activities: planting an expanded garden, repairing fences damaged by snow, and most excitingly, the birth of 7 new calves from the pregnant cows in their small herd. 29 head now, Wade announced proudly after the last calf was born. "If we continue at this rate, we'll have a substantial herd within a few years." Vivienne, her own pregnancy now visible beneath her loosened dresses, found a special joy in watching the gangly calves nurse and play. "Our child will grow up surrounded by new life," she observed, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her abdomen. "What a wonderful thing!" By June, Vivienne's pregnancy had advanced to the point where many activities became difficult. Her ankles swelled in the summer heat, and her back ached after even moderate exertion. Wade insisted she rest more, taking on additional responsibilities despite the demands of the growing ranch. "The baby is the priority," he said firmly when Vivienne protested that she was leaving too much work to him. "The ranch can wait." In July, as Vivienne entered her final month of pregnancy, a familiar figure appeared at their homestead, U.S. Marshal Thomas Grant, looking considerably less cold and tired than during his winter visit. "Marshal," Wade greeted him, stepping out to meet the lawman before he reached the cabin. "What brings you back to our valley?" "Good news this time," Grant replied, dismounting from his horse. "Illy Hardin has been captured and is awaiting trial in Denver. I wanted to let folks in the area know they can rest easier." Wade invited the marshal to stay for dinner, an offer Grant accepted gratefully. As they ate, the conversation turned to other news from beyond their isolated valley. "Any word from Oregon?" Wade asked casually, though Vivienne could sense the tension beneath the question. Grant shook his head. "None that I've heard. though there was an interesting notice in a Denver newspaper a few months back. A rancher from Oregon looking for information about a man and woman who had fled the state, offering a reward. Vivienne's hand instinctively went to her swollen abdomen, a protective gesture that didn't escape the marshal's notice. "This rancher," Wade pressed, "did he give names?" "He did," Grant confirmed, "and they happen to match yours. Curious coincidence." A heavy silence fell over the table. The marshal continued eating calmly, his eyes moving between Wade and Vivienne. "It's not what you might think," Wade finally said. "There was no crime." "I didn't say there was," Grant pointed out. "But I am curious about why a wealthy Oregon rancher would be offering rewards for information about a couple who by all appearances are honest homesteaders building a legitimate ranch." Vivienne's gaze met Wade's across the table. With a small nod, she encouraged him to tell the truth. If the marshal was already suspicious, lies would only make their situation worse. Wade took a deep breath and related the entire story: Vivienne's father's debts, Blackburn's coercion, the interrupted wedding, and their flight to Colorado to escape Blackburn's influence. The marshal listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "So you see," Wade concluded, "we broke no laws. I paid Vivienne's father's debts in full, which negated any claim Blackburn had on her. We left Oregon as legally married husband and wife." "And now you're building a life here," Grant observed, his gaze taking in their neat cabin, the thriving garden visible through the window, Vivienne's advanced pregnancy. "A good life from the looks of it." "We are," Vivienne confirmed, her hand finding Wade's across the table. "The best kind of life." The marshal nodded slowly. "Well, I'm no expert on Oregon contract law," he said finally, "but I do know that a man can't force a woman to marry him, debt or no debt, and I know that folks deserve a chance at happiness without being hounded across state lines." He pushed back from the table and stood. "As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing here that requires my attention. Just a hard-working couple building a ranch and awaiting the birth of their child. If anyone comes asking questions in Pine Creek Junction, I doubt they'll find anyone willing to point them in your direction." Relief flooded through Vivienne at the marshal's words. "Thank you," she said simply. Grant tipped his hat. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Quincy. Just be good citizens of Colorado Territory, raise your child right, and consider your debt to society paid in full." After the marshal departed, Wade gathered Vivienne in his arms, his face buried in her hair. "I've been worried about Blackburn finding us," he admitted, "even after all this time." "He won't give up easily," Vivienne cautioned. "He's a proud man and we humiliated him publicly." "But we have allies now," Wade pointed out. "The Andersons, the people in Pine Creek Junction who trade with us, even Marshal Grant. We're not alone anymore." Vivienne nodded against his chest, taking comfort in his words. They had built not just a home and a ranch, but a place in a community that would protect them if needed. 2 weeks later, on a sweltering August afternoon, Vivienne's labor began. Wade rode immediately for the Anderson homestead, returning with Sarah and clean linens for the birth. For hours, Vivienne labored, Wade alternating between pacing outside the cabin and holding her hand through the worst contractions. Finally, as the sun set beyond the western mountains, their child entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. "You have a son," Sarah announced, placing the red-faced, squalling infant on Vivienne's chest after quickly cleaning and swaddling him. A strong, healthy boy. Wade, who had been holding Vivienne's hand through the final stages of labor, stared down at the tiny face with wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Vivienne gazed at their child, taking in the shock of dark hair and the tiny fists waving in protest at his abrupt entry into the world. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." Later, after Sarah had departed with promises to return the next day, Wade and Vivienne lay together in their bed, their son sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside them. "What shall we name him?" Wade asked, gently stroking the infant's cheek with one finger. Vivienne had been considering this question for months. "I thought perhaps William," she suggested, "after your father." She paused, then added, "William Thomas Quincy." "Thomas?" Wade questioned, though he was clearly pleased by the inclusion of his father's name. "After Marshall Grant," Vivienne explained. "He's part of the reason we're safe here, able to raise our son in peace." Wade considered this, then nodded. "William Thomas Quincy," he repeated, testing the name. "It has strength. It has history. It's perfect for our son." As summer faded into autumn, the Quincy family settled into a new routine centered around young William's needs. The ranch continued to thrive, with Wade hiring occasional help from Pine Creek Junction for larger projects. Their cattle herd grew, the garden produced abundantly, and plans were made for expanding the cabin to accommodate their growing family. Vivienne found that motherhood, while exhausting, brought her a fulfillment she had never expected. Watching William grow and develop, his features increasingly reflecting both his parents, filled her with profound joy. Wade proved to be a devoted father, spending hours with William even after long days working the ranch. He fashioned toys from wood, sang the boy to sleep with old cowboy songs, and spoke to him constantly about the ranch and the animals and the mountains surrounding their home. "He's too young to understand," Vivienne pointed out one evening as Wade explained the process of branding cattle to their 3-month-old son. "Maybe," Wade conceded with a smile, "but he seems to like the sound of my voice. And someday, he'll understand all of it. This will be his legacy too." On a crisp October day, much like the one that had seen Vivienne running from a church in Portland over a year earlier, the Quincy family journeyed to Pine Creek Junction. William, bundled against the autumn chill, observed the world with wide eyes from the safety of his mother's arms as Wade drove the wagon. Their first stop was the general store, where supplies were purchased, and William was admired by the shopkeeper's wife. Then, dressed in their finest clothes, Vivienne in a new dress she had sewn for the occasion, Wade in the embroidered shirt she had made him for Christmas, they visited the photographer who had recently established a studio in town. "A family portrait," Wade explained to the photographer, who positioned them carefully before his camera. Wade standing tall and proud, Vivienne seated with William on her lap, both parents gazing at their child with undisguised love. When the photographs were developed and presented to them, Wade selected the best one and carefully cut it to fit inside Vivienne's silver locket. The tiny image joined the lock of his hair that had been there since their first night as true husband and wife. "Now you have both of us close to your heart," he said as he fastened the locket around Vivienne's neck. "Always," she promised, her hand covering the small silver oval that contained the physical tokens of what had become the center of her world, her husband and her son. That night, after they had returned to their cabin and William had been settled in his cradle, Wade led Vivienne outside to the porch. The autumn air was cool but not yet cold, the sky above them a canopy of stars as vast and brilliant as the one that had sheltered their tent on their first night in the valley. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked suddenly. "Leaving everything behind to come here with me?" Vivienne looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "How could I regret the decision that brought me everything I hold dear?" Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "When I rode after you that day in Portland, when I saw you running from the church, I had no plan beyond getting you away from Blackburn. I never imagined we would build all this together." "What did you imagine?" Vivienne asked curiously. Wade considered the question. "I thought perhaps we would establish a small ranch, live as friendly partners, each grateful to the other for different reasons. I hoped, eventually, we might develop genuine affection for each other." He smiled down at her. "I never dared dream that I would fall so completely in love with you or that you might love me in return." "Yet here we are," Vivienne said softly. "Here we are," Wade agreed. "A family, a home, a future brighter than anything I could have envisioned." Inside the cabin, William made a small sound in his sleep. Both parents listened intently until he settled again, their faces reflecting the mixture of anxiety and adoration that had become their constant companion since his birth. "We should go in," Vivienne said finally. "It's getting cold." Wade nodded but didn't immediately move. Instead, he turned Vivienne to face him, his eyes serious in the starlight. "Vivienne Quincy," he said formally, "would you do me the honor of renewing our vows, not out of necessity or convenience, but purely from love?" Perhaps next spring, when the valley is in bloom, tears pricked at Vivienne's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I would like that very much." Their kiss, sweet and full of promise, sealed the agreement, not a first pledge between strangers bound by circumstance, but a renewal of vows between partners who had chosen each other, built a life together, and found in that life more joy than either had dared to hope for. As they returned to the warmth of their cabin, to the son sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Vivienne reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. From the desperate flight from a forced marriage to Silas Blackburn, to the unexpected proposal from Wade Quincy, to the journey across states to a valley she had never seen, each step, though frightening at the time, had been necessary to bring her here, to this life, to this love. Some might call it chance or coincidence that Wade had seen her running from the church that autumn day. But as Vivienne watched her husband gently adjust the blanket over their sleeping son, she preferred to think of it as destiny, two souls meant to find each other, to build something beautiful together, to write a love story that had only just begun.